A messenger bursts into the White House on a cold November morning in 1861. President Lincoln reads the news with growing concern. The Union Navy has just stopped a British ship and arrested 2 Confederate diplomats. In an instant, the American Civil War threatens to explode into a much bigger conflict. Across the ocean at Windsor Castle, Queen Victoria holds a similar message. Her advisors want immediate action against the Americans for this insult to British pride. Cotton mills are closing across England as the Union's blockade of southern ports cuts off vital supplies. Confederate agents whisper promises of trade deals if Britain will only recognize their cause. Victoria looks to her husband Albert, who lies ill with fever, for guidance. Britain's choice seems impossible: support the slave-holding Confederacy and gain economic advantages, or stand back and watch British workers suffer as the mills stay silent. In Washington, Lincoln stands alone in his office. The Union is already fighting for survival against the Confederate States. He knows a war with Britain, the world's strongest naval power, would likely destroy any hope of keeping America united. Everything now depends on how Queen Victoria responds to this crisis. Neither ruler has ever met the other, but their choices in the coming weeks will shape the future of both their nations. Victoria, though limited by her role as a constitutional monarch, holds enormous influence over public opinion. Lincoln, often underestimated as a backwoods lawyer, proves himself a skilled player in international politics. This is the story of how 2 very different leaders faced a crisis that threatened to tear apart the English-speaking world. It's a tale of secret messages, clever diplomacy, and moral choices that would affect millions of lives. Their decisions during these crucial months would not only determine the fate of the American Civil War, but would also forge a new relationship between 2 great nations that continues to this day. On a chilly February day in 1809, in a small log cabin in Hardin County, Kentucky, Abraham Lincoln enters the world. His beginnings are as humble as the rough-hewn boards that make up his home. His parents, Thomas and Nancy Hanks Lincoln, live off the land, scraping by in the untamed American frontier. Abe grows up surrounded by dense forests, his early years shaped by hard work and uncertainty. The frontier is a place where survival depends on resilience, and even as a child, Abe begins to develop the quiet determination that will later define him. From his earliest years, Lincoln's intellectual hunger defied his limited circumstances. With less than a year of formal schooling, he becomes largely self-educated, devouring any book he can find. His stepmother, Sarah Bush Johnston, recognizes something extraordinary in the boy who would rather read than work. When other parents might have discouraged such behavior, she becomes his champion, saying, "He's going to amount to something, and I won't see him held back." Lincoln's physical prowess becomes as legendary as his intellectual curiosity. On the rough-and-tumble frontier, he emerges as an accomplished wrestler, losing only 1 match out of approximately 300. Yet beneath his strong exterior lies a profound emotional vulnerability. Historians would later recognize his chronic melancholy, what we now understand as clinical depression. There were dark periods in his youth when suicidal thoughts plagued him, a struggle he would battle throughout his life. His passion for reading becomes his salvation. Shakespeare becomes a particular favorite, the playwright's words offering solace and understanding during his darkest moments. This love of literature and storytelling becomes a powerful tool, helping him transform personal pain into universal wisdom. 9 years later, on May 24, 1819, in Kensington Palace, Victoria is born into a world of privilege, yet one as constraining in its way as Lincoln's poverty. Her nursery is lined with fine tapestries, but her life is governed by the suffocating Kensington system, a set of rules designed to keep her isolated and dependent. Victoria's childhood is a psychological battleground. Like Lincoln, she finds escape in intellectual pursuits. She begins keeping a remarkable diary, a document that would eventually span 60 million words, becoming her primary means of resistance against the strict controls imposed upon her. Multilingual from a young age, she masters French, German, Italian, and Latin, using language as a form of personal liberation. Her father, the Duke of Kent, dies when she is just 8 months old, leaving her under the control of her ambitious mother and Sir John Conroy. The Kensington system dictates every aspect of her life. She must hold someone's hand to walk downstairs, is never allowed to play unsupervised, and sleeps in her mother's room until becoming queen. The personal challenges shape both leaders profoundly. Lincoln's life is marked by devastating personal losses. He would ultimately outlive 3 of his 4 sons, each death carving deeper wounds into his already fragile emotional landscape. His marriage to Mary Todd is tumultuous, adding another layer of personal struggle to his already complex life. Victoria, too, faces her own emotional trials. Her large number of pregnancies, 9 children in total, becomes both a duty and a burden. She speaks candidly in her diary about the physical and emotional toll of motherhood, often feeling overwhelmed by the expectations placed upon her. Their teenage years reveal the seeds of future leadership. Lincoln's intellectual curiosity and physical strength make him a natural peacemaker. His ability to diffuse tension with a well-timed story becomes legendary. Victoria, though physically small, develops an iron will. Her diary becomes a testament to her resistance, a private rebellion against the constraints of her upbringing. Both Lincoln and Victoria develop remarkable resilience. Lincoln's interest in technology and scientific advancement begins to emerge, showing a mind constantly seeking understanding. Victoria's multilingual abilities and her keen observation of court politics prepare her for the complex role of monarch. By their early adulthood, they have been shaped by their struggles with authority and control. Lincoln's experiences with frontier hardship instill in him a profound empathy for the common man. Victoria's battle against the Kensington system gives her an acute understanding of power's constraints and the importance of personal freedom. These parallel journeys, one from the wilderness of Kentucky, the other from the confines of Kensington Palace, create leaders uniquely suited to face the challenges ahead. When their paths cross during the Civil War, both will draw on these early lessons. Lincoln's ability to unite opposed sides through empathy and reason, Victoria's understanding of how to exercise power within constitutional limits while maintaining personal conviction. By the 1860s, Queen Victoria and Abraham Lincoln had ascended to leadership roles that placed them at the crossroads of history. Though they governed in vastly different systems, Victoria as a constitutional monarch constrained by Parliament, and Lincoln as the elected leader of a fragile democracy, their leadership styles and shared values reveal striking parallels. Victoria's early reign showed both her strength and vulnerability. At just 18, she was awakened at 6 a.m. to receive news of her uncle's death and her accession to the throne. Her first act was deeply symbolic, moving her bed from her mother's room, where the Kensington system had forced her to sleep for 18 years. Standing before her first Privy Council meeting, the tiny queen, barely 5 feet tall, filled the room with her presence. The Duke of Wellington later noted that despite her small stature, she had not only filled her chair, but commanded the entire room. Like Victoria, Lincoln's rise required him to overcome initial doubts about his capability. When he won the Republican nomination in 1860, he was a 51-year-old prairie lawyer from Illinois without any executive experience. His lack of formal education, less than a year of schooling, made many question his competence. Yet his deep intellect, passionate reading, particularly of Shakespeare, and remarkable ability to articulate complex ideas would prove his greatest strengths. Lincoln's chronic melancholy, which had plagued him since youth, did not diminish his leadership. If anything, his struggles with depression gave him a profound empathy and resilience. He had survived personal tragedies that would have broken lesser men, losing 3 of his 4 sons, navigating a tumultuous marriage with Mary Todd, and battling persistent thoughts of despair. Yet he transformed these personal struggles into a deep well of compassion and understanding. Victoria's marriage to her cousin Prince Albert in 1840 transformed both her personal life and her reign. Together, they created a working partnership unprecedented in British royal history, sitting at side-by-side desks in Buckingham Palace handling state papers. Though Victoria was deeply in love with Albert, their relationship was complex. She resented her 9 pregnancies, considering babies little more than plants in their first months. Yet she and Albert created a new model of royal family life that would influence generations. While Victoria found her political partner in Albert, Lincoln assembled his famous team of rivals, bringing former opponents into his cabinet. Both leaders showed remarkable ability to work with those who might challenge them, though their approaches differed. Victoria and Albert championed modernization through projects like the Great Exhibition of 1851, while Lincoln, with his keen interest in technology and scientific advancement, focused on preserving the Union while pushing for gradual reform. Victoria's diplomatic skills grew throughout her reign. Her multilingual abilities, speaking German, French, Italian, Latin, and later Hindustani, became a powerful tool. She mastered the art of soft power through family connections, eventually placing her descendants on thrones across Europe. Her extraordinary 60-million-word diary stands as a testament to her self-reflection and intellectual depth. Lincoln, too, developed his diplomatic talents, though in a different context. His experience as a lawyer and politician taught him to read people and situations carefully. His gift for explaining complex issues in simple terms helped him communicate his vision for the Union to both domestic and international audiences. The storytelling skills that had helped him survive the emotional challenges of his early life now became crucial political tools. Both leaders faced intense personal and political pressures. Victoria struggled to balance her role as queen with her position as wife and mother, while Lincoln grappled with the immense burden of holding a fracturing nation together, all while fighting his own internal battles with depression. Yet both found ways to convert their personal challenges into political strengths. Their shared belief in progress manifested differently, but pointed in the same direction. Victoria and Albert embraced technological advancement, supporting projects that showcased human achievement. Lincoln, even amidst the chaos of war, signed legislation creating land-grant colleges and supporting the Transcontinental Railroad, initiatives that would transform the American landscape. By the time the Civil War erupted, both leaders had developed distinct leadership styles that would shape their coming interaction. Victoria had mastered the art of influential suggestion, learning to guide policy through careful persuasion rather than direct command. Lincoln had developed a leadership approach that combined intellectual depth, emotional intelligence, and a remarkable ability to unite people through storytelling and empathy. On November 8, 1861, things got really tense when Captain Charles Wilkes of the USS San Jacinto did something pretty shocking. He boarded a British mail ship in international waters and grabbed 2 Confederate diplomats who were trying to get European support for the Confederate cause. This move caused an instant uproar in Britain. Newspapers were screaming for war, and the government demanded the diplomats be returned immediately. In Washington, Lincoln knew exactly what was at stake. A fight with Britain could completely destroy any chance of keeping the United States together. Lincoln and Victoria were caught in a tricky diplomatic mess. Confederate agents were whispering about lucrative trade deals to Britain's struggling textile industry, while politicians on both sides were itching for a fight. But both leaders wanted to find a peaceful way out. Lincoln's team was split, but he managed the crisis brilliantly. His Secretary of State, William Seward, found a way for everyone to save face. The diplomats were released without a formal apology, presented as a respectful nod to international law. Victoria worked behind the scenes, quietly calming down the most aggressive voices in the British government. Her subtle influence gave everyone room to breathe and avoid a potential disaster. When the Civil War broke out, Lincoln faced challenges unlike any president before him. From the first shots at Fort Sumter, he understood this wasn't just a military conflict. It was a fight for the soul of the nation. The early months were rough. The Union Army was a mess, poorly organized and constantly losing battles. Lincoln kept changing military leaders, trying to find someone who could actually challenge the Confederate forces. Generals like George McClellan drove him crazy with their reluctance to fight. Lincoln expanded presidential power in ways nobody had ever seen before. He suspended legal protections, started a military draft, and used powers that would have been unthinkable just years earlier. But he always believed these actions were necessary to save the country. The Emancipation Proclamation was his biggest move. At first, Lincoln just wanted to keep the country together. But as the war went on, he saw that ending slavery was crucial. When he issued the proclamation on January 1, 1863, it was a game-changer. It made stopping slavery an official war goal and stopped European countries from supporting the Confederacy. The war was emotionally devastating for Lincoln. He personally felt the weight of every soldier's death. He visited hospitals, met wounded soldiers, and suffered even more deeply after losing his own son Willie in 1862. His speeches became powerful weapons. The Gettysburg Address wasn't just about the war. It was about creating a new vision of American democracy. He talked about a new birth of freedom that would reshape the entire nation. Behind the scenes, Lincoln was a political genius. He brought his biggest rivals into his cabinet, creating a team that could see things from different angles. This helped him keep the country somewhat united during its most divided moment. As the war continued, Lincoln became more confident. He worked closely with generals like Ulysses S. Grant and understood that only a complete victory could truly reunite the country. In his final inaugural address, just weeks before his assassination, he spoke about healing the nation. "With malice toward none, with charity for all," he said, showing remarkable compassion even towards those who had fought against the Union. The Civil War was ultimately a test of Lincoln's character. He didn't just survive as a wartime president. He transformed the very idea of American democracy. Then came the devastating blow that would reshape Victoria's reign, and influence her handling of the American crisis. In December 1861, Albert died of typhoid fever, plunging Victoria into deep mourning. Yet, even in her grief, she remained engaged with the American question, perhaps seeing in Lincoln's struggle to preserve his Union a reflection of her own fight to maintain stability and progress. By the mid-19th century, the paths of Queen Victoria and President Abraham Lincoln, though separated by an ocean, began to converge in the realm of shared ideals. They ruled over vastly different systems of government, Victoria as a constitutional monarch, and Lincoln as the elected leader of a republic, but both came to symbolize the moral and cultural aspirations of their nations during a time of seismic change. Victoria was often portrayed as the embodiment of British strength and dignity, her name synonymous with an age of industrial progress and global empire. Yet, beneath the public persona was a woman deeply marked by personal struggles. Her 60-million-word diary reveals a complex inner life, a chronicle of emotional vulnerability masked by royal composure. She had survived the suffocating Kensington system of her childhood, endured 9 pregnancies that she often viewed as burdensome, and navigated the profound grief of losing her beloved Albert. Lincoln carried similar emotional depth. His chronic melancholy, what we would now recognize as clinical depression, was a constant companion. A man who had lost 3 of his 4 sons, who battled persistent dark thoughts since his youth, he transformed personal suffering into a universal message of hope and resilience. His passion for Shakespeare and his love of storytelling became more than mere intellectual pursuits. They were survival mechanisms, tools that allowed him to process and transcend personal pain. Both leaders were remarkable for their ability to rise above personal challenges. Victoria, despite her limited formal education, became multilingual, mastering German, French, Italian, Latin, and later, Hindustani. Lincoln, with less than a year of formal schooling, became a self-educated intellectual deeply interested in technology and scientific advancement. Their intellectual curiosity became a form of liberation. Victoria's leadership was shaped by her complicated personal experiences. Her tumultuous relationship with her mother under the Kensington system, her complex feelings about motherhood, and her profound grief after Albert's death, all informed her approach to governance. She wielded power with a nuanced understanding of its constraints, using her family connections across European royal houses as a sophisticated diplomatic network. Lincoln similarly transformed personal adversity into political strength. His turbulent marriage to Mary Todd, the devastating losses of his children, and his ongoing battle with depression did not break him, but instead deepened his empathy. His ability to communicate complex ideas simply, to find universal truths in personal experiences, made him a unique leader. Victoria championed social reforms, learning about her colonial subjects, defending them against court prejudices, and using her personal funds to support causes like Irish famine relief. Lincoln fought to preserve the Union not just as a political entity, but as a moral experiment in human equality. For both Lincoln and Victoria, the fight against slavery represented the most profound moral challenge of their leadership. Though separated by an ocean and operating within different political systems, they shared a fundamental commitment to human dignity that would reshape the global understanding of human rights. Lincoln's journey toward abolition was complex and evolutionary. Initially, his primary goal was preserving the Union, not immediately ending slavery. But as the Civil War progressed, he recognized that the conflict was fundamentally a moral struggle. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued on January 1, 1863, was more than a military strategy. It was a transformative moral statement. By declaring slaves in Confederate states to be free, Lincoln repositioned the war as a fight for human liberty. Across the Atlantic, Victoria's approach was equally significant. Building on the work of her husband Albert, she played a crucial role in the final stages of abolishing slavery throughout the British Empire. The Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 had already begun this process, but Victoria's moral influence helped ensure its complete implementation and prevented any backsliding. Victoria used her position to support anti-slavery movements, leveraging her diplomatic influence to discourage the slave trade globally. Her personal correspondence and political pressure helped maintain Britain's commitment to ending slavery, even when economic interests suggested otherwise. The royal family's moral stance became a powerful tool in international diplomacy. For Lincoln, the Emancipation Proclamation was a personal and political risk. Many in the North were not committed to racial equality, and the proclamation threatened to alienate border states. Yet he understood that the nation could not truly be united without addressing the fundamental injustice of slavery. His words reflected a profound moral vision, that a nation founded on the principle that all men are created equal must live up to that promise. Victoria's approach was more subtle but equally powerful. Through her extensive family connections across European monarchies, she used soft diplomatic power to influence attitudes towards slavery and human rights. Her support for colonial reforms and her interest in the lives of subjects across the empire created a moral framework that challenged existing power structures. The global impact of their actions cannot be overstated. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation inspired abolitionists worldwide and fundamentally changed the nature of the American experiment. Victoria's influence helped ensure that the British Empire became a global force against slavery, using diplomatic and economic pressure to discourage the practice internationally. Both leaders understood that ending slavery was about more than legal status. It was about recognizing the full humanity of all people. Lincoln's famous words that all men are created equal found a parallel in Victoria's increasingly progressive view of her imperial responsibilities. Their moral leadership on slavery represented a turning point in human history. They demonstrated that political power could be a force for fundamental human rights, setting a precedent that would inspire future generations of leaders around the world. Both leaders understood the power of personal narrative. Victoria's extensive diary and Lincoln's love of storytelling were more than personal indulgences. They were political tools. They used communication to bridge divides, to explain complex ideas, and to create a sense of shared humanity. Their leadership was characterized by an extraordinary ability to maintain hope in the face of profound challenges. Victoria navigated the complexities of a global empire while managing her own inner turmoil. Lincoln guided a nation through its bloodiest conflict while battling his own depression, using his remarkable ability to find light in darkness. The turbulent 1860s tested their leadership in unprecedented ways. The American Civil War threatened not just national unity, but the very principles of human dignity. Victoria's influence prevented British intervention on the side of the Confederacy, a decision influenced by her and Albert's moral opposition to slavery. Lincoln's fight was equally principled, a struggle to prove that democracy could survive its greatest test. Their shared belief in progress transcended their different political systems. Victoria and Albert had championed technological advancement through projects like the Great Exhibition of 1851. Lincoln signed legislation supporting the Transcontinental Railroad and land-grant colleges, believing in technology's power to unite and elevate society. The year 1861 brought the ultimate test for both leaders. 11 southern states seceded following Lincoln's election, while Britain's textile industry clamored for intervention as cotton supplies dwindled. Victoria and Albert received constant pressure from Confederate sympathizers in Parliament, while Lincoln faced the challenge of preventing European recognition of the Confederacy while building an army from scratch. Though they never met, Victoria and Lincoln represented a new kind of leadership, one rooted in moral courage, intellectual depth, and a profound understanding of human complexity. They showed that true leadership is not about perfection, but about resilience, empathy, and the ability to transform personal pain into collective hope. Their legacy continues to inspire. Two leaders who, despite personal struggles, maintained an unwavering commitment to progress, justice, and human dignity. In their parallel journeys from constrained backgrounds to positions of global influence, they demonstrated the transformative power of compassionate, principled leadership. On April 15, 1865, the news reaches Britain. Abraham Lincoln, the president who led the Union through its darkest hour, has been assassinated. Queen Victoria, still mourning Albert's death and wearing black, a symbol of her profound grief, is deeply moved. In a rare gesture of personal connection, she writes to Mary Todd Lincoln, expressing condolences that reveal her own understanding of loss. "I understand too well the depth of sorrow you now face." Lincoln's final journey home became an unprecedented national mourning ritual that would be remembered for generations. For 12 extraordinary days, his funeral train carried his body from Washington to Springfield, transforming the railway into a moving national memorial. Hundreds of thousands of Americans, from both North and South, rich and poor, former slaves and former Confederate soldiers, lined the tracks in silent, profound mourning. Cities and towns along the route fell into a remarkable stillness. Factories closed, church bells tolled, and entire communities stood in reverent tribute. At each stop, Lincoln's body was displayed, allowing citizens to pay their final respects. The train's progress was more than a funeral procession. It was a collective act of national healing, a ritual of mourning that helped a deeply divided country begin to reconcile. From Baltimore to Chicago, through small rural towns and major cities, Americans witnessed something unprecedented. A president's body transported not just as a political symbol, but as a deeply personal loss shared by an entire nation. The journey became a testament to Lincoln's ability to touch lives across social, economic, and racial boundaries. A final, powerful demonstration of the unity he had fought so hard to preserve. Lincoln's death marks the tragic end of a presidency defined by personal struggle and national transformation. A man who battled chronic depression throughout his life, who had lost 3 of his 4 sons, and who had survived a tumultuous marriage, he nonetheless guided the United States through its most critical moment. His journey from a self-educated frontier lawyer with less than a year of formal schooling to the president who preserved the Union represents an extraordinary testament to human resilience. Victoria's legacy proves equally complex and profound. Though officially the empress of a global empire, her personal life told a different story. Her 60-million-word diary reveals a woman far more nuanced than her public image suggested. She had survived the suffocating Kensington system of her childhood, endured 9 pregnancies that she often found overwhelming, and navigated the profound grief of losing Albert, a loss that plunged her into decades of mourning. Both leaders transformed personal pain into public purpose. Lincoln's melancholy, which had threatened to overwhelm him in his youth, became a source of deep empathy. His passion for Shakespeare and his remarkable storytelling abilities allowed him to articulate the nation's struggles in deeply human terms. Victoria similarly used her personal experiences to inform her leadership, defying court conventions by forming close relationships with servants and learning multiple languages. Their legacies extend far beyond their immediate political achievements. Lincoln's vision of equality, born from his wrestling matches on the frontier and his encounters with slavery, reshaped the fundamental promise of American democracy. Victoria's leadership transformed the monarchy, making it more accessible and symbolically powerful. She used her family connections to create a diplomatic network across European thrones, while maintaining a keen interest in the lives of her colonial subjects. The relationship between Britain and the United States evolves in the shadow of their leadership. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the two nations moved from mutual suspicion to a burgeoning partnership. This transformation owes much to the foundation laid during the Civil War, when Victoria's moral leadership and Lincoln's diplomatic restraint prevented a potentially catastrophic conflict. Their influence extends beyond politics. Victoria's emphasis on family values and public service reshapes the image of monarchy, making it more relatable to her subjects. Her example inspires future generations of British royals, from George VI during World War II to Elizabeth II in the modern era. Lincoln's vision of democracy, rooted in the idea that government should serve all its people, becomes a touchstone for leaders across the globe. Both faced extraordinary personal challenges that could have destroyed lesser individuals. Lincoln's losses, 3 dead sons, a challenging marriage, persistent depression, might have broken his spirit. Victoria's constrained childhood, the pressures of 9 pregnancies, and her prolonged grief could have diminished her capabilities. Instead, these challenges became sources of strength, informing their leadership with profound empathy and resilience. Their shared approach to leadership transcended their different political systems. Both understood that true power comes not from position, but from moral conviction. Lincoln, the self-educated wrestler and Shakespeare enthusiast, and Victoria, the multilingual monarch who defied court conventions, showed that leadership is about understanding human complexity. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the world they helped shape faced new challenges. Yet the lessons of their leadership endure. The importance of balancing progress with stability, the need to confront injustice with courage, and the power of hope to unite divided peoples. Though they never met, their stories are bound together by the currents of history. Victoria's extensive diary and Lincoln's passionate storytelling become more than personal records. They are windows into the soul of leadership. Their shared ideals of justice, progress, and moral responsibility continue to inspire leaders and citizens alike. In the partnership between Britain and America, their legacy lives on, a testament to the power of vision, empathy, and the enduring pursuit of a better world. Two leaders who transformed personal struggle into collective hope, proving that true leadership is not about perfection, but about the courage to remain human in the face of extraordinary challenges.